It is Thursday, July 21st here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And if you're on Twitter at all today, you might notice us announcing the draft orders for the third annual Draft Sharks Invitational. We've run it twice already, Jared. Peter Overzet won the first year. Chad Schroeder won last year. It, of course, brings together some of the top fantasy analysts and some of the top high-stakes fantasy football players. One best ball tournament just to kind of get bragging rights over everybody and to take away some of our boss's money.
Yeah, it's always funny announcing the leagues because the reaction's like, oh, this league is loaded. And then we announce the next league. Oh, this league is even more loaded than the last one. So it's definitely an impressive group of drafters. I've struggled in it the last couple of years, because it is such tough. It's the toughest competition I face all year in any fantasy league.
I'm happy to say that I won my league the first year, I think I finished second last year. I got overtaken by Crack Rock in that league. So I'll be looking to bring it back up to the top. We will be hosting those leagues on Fantrax for the first time ever this year. Of course, fantrax.com, free to everybody to use, free to us to set up. And Jared, I know that you just finished setting up all 6 of these invitational leagues on there. And setting up 6 fantasy football leagues is not an enviable task anywhere, but how did it go for you on Fantrax?
Yeah, well, I really only had to set up one because Fantrax has a copy league feature. So I just had to set up the first league, then it's like 5 pushes of a button, and I got the 5 other leagues. I just had to change the owners and the draft times. The DS Invite has some funky rules. Super flex, tight end premium scoring, 1.5 PPR for tight ends versus 1 PPR for the rest of the positions. It's best ball, 25 rounds, but Fantrax handled that easily, and it took me 10 minutes to set up all those leagues.
And of course, they will be able to give us a full overall leaderboard, which we'll all be tracking throughout the season to see who wins the largest share of Lenny Papano's money at the end. So yeah, fantrax.com. Rich in features, easily customizable, free for everybody. Go to fantrax.com/draftsharks and set up your free league now. If you do it inside of July, you get a shot at a signed Travis Kelce jersey. So make sure you go ahead and get your shot at that. I know, Jared, one thing that I'm looking forward to help me try to win my league again, hopefully the overall prize, is the Draft Sharks War Room, which is even better this year. And we'll be syncing with Fantrax drafts, and we'll be able to handle the Superflex format. I think that's one reason that I really love the drafts that are outside of the norm. Not too kooky where nobody knows what's going on, but just different enough that everybody doesn't come in having already done 200 of these in mock or best ball draft form and knowing exactly what to expect.
I think I need to trust my Draft Sharks War Room more this year in that draft. I feel like I've sort of strayed from it. I'm like, no, that's not right. I'm not going to take this quarterback over this running back. But the board is telling me to do that. I should probably trust the numbers. The board is customized to the exact league scoring. It knows who's on my team. It knows who's still on the board. How much value is at certain positions, and it takes that all into account to sort of give you an overall ranking, give you a top 4 or 5 list of players to target. So I think that's what I'm gonna do this year. I'm gonna actually trust the board and see if things go better for me.
Yeah, even more useful with stuff like Superflex and tight end premium, because it can get tougher to intuitively rate those positions against each other when you have different scoring options than what you usually play with. So definitely helps there. And I mean, the sync is taking players off as you draft, so it makes it easier to keep up with those rankings and have recommendations that work when it gets to your turn. So looking forward to that. We'll get those drafts. We'll keep announcing the leagues throughout today and tomorrow. We've got 6 leagues going. The drafts are in the first 2 weeks of August. We'll be streaming all of those right here, so you can watch them live on YouTube. You can listen to the podcast. Today, we are getting into our 6th divisional preview. It is AFC North Day. Jared, let's start with the Baltimore Ravens, who didn't really have anything of note on the coaching change front, right?
No, John Harbaugh back for his 15th season as head coach. Greg Roman back for his 4th season as Baltimore's offensive coordinator. Of course, last year we got a big change in play calling philosophy from these Ravens. So in Greg Roman's first 2 seasons as offensive coordinator, the Ravens threw on basically 44% of their plays. It was a 44.0 and then 44.1% pass rate. That spiked to 56.4% in 2021. And their situation neutral pass rate also spiked from 42.6% and 43.9% Roman's first 2 years to 53.8% last year. So it was, it was by design that this team wanted to throw it more last season. The question, I think, is why that was the case. Is it they wanted to do it? They wanted to put more on Lamar Jackson's plate? Or is it because they lost basically their entire running back core in August last season?
I would imagine that it was some of each of those things. I remember saying last summer, I think there's a chance based on the moves that they've done, drafting Rashad Bateman among them, based on their moves this offseason, I wonder if they're going to throw the ball more. And yet I still didn't let that make me draft Mark Andrews. So that's one of those kind of learning going forward. If I think this, then what else does that mean for who I should draft where? We'll talk more about Mark Andrews as we get further into this one. I do think it's part both of those. We obviously don't know what the impact would have been had those running backs been healthy, but it makes sense that a team's not going to pass the ball on just 44% of plays every year, regardless of who their quarterback is.
Yeah.
So for projecting them, I'm closer to last year's rates than I am the previous years. I projected the team at 53-47. That's down from 56-44 the year before, but obviously still way up from the 44% pass rates of the previous two seasons, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I kind of split the difference. I'm at 51% pass right now, and there are still a lot of moving parts here, which we'll get into. I mean, we still don't know about J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards for the start of the season. Baltimore traded away their number one wide receiver in last year in Marquise Brown and haven't added much at the position. There's still a couple names out there that they could add that might shift them towards the pass a little. So I'm at 51% pass for now. I could see that going up or down, over the next few weeks here.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think anywhere in the neighborhood of 50-50 is probably good. I would not start out expecting back below 50% pass. I think it's not fair to expect it to be up at last year's level. So otherwise, we're all guessing. And as you mentioned, they have questions that they need to answer heading in. If we thought, if I thought last year heading into the season, maybe they're going to pass more, then I have to think by the way they've moved to this offseason, maybe they want to run more because they traded away Marquise Brown. They did not bring anybody else of note in. They're getting those two running backs back healthy, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. So it seems as though they don't want to increase passing like they did last year. Quarterback Lamar Jackson, of course, regardless of what they're doing, is at the center of everything and missed some time last year, lost the last 4 games with an ankle sprain, also missed nearly all of the game before that, the game where he got hurt, and missed another game with illness in Chicago. He still had the Lamar Jackson spike weeks. He matched Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes for the most weeks of 35 plus fantasy points for the season, despite playing just 12 games. And as I said, just 11 real games. That's inside of an article I just posted on draftsharks.com today, looking back at QB scoring with spike weeks and who scored like a top 12 quarterback most often. And Lamar Jackson, outside of those spike weeks, kind of meh results otherwise. Top 12 level scoring in 7 of his 12 games overall, 58.3%. That's 8th among quarterbacks. It gets a little bit better if you take out the game where he got hurt, but still not your best bet to get top 12 level scoring, but did have that spike week potential when he was healthy. And really, one key thing is that his rushing yards per game were still there. They were up a little bit versus the previous season, despite an offensive line that could probably stand to rebound some this year.
Yeah, Jackson's been top 3 among quarterbacks in rushing fantasy points per game in each of the last 3 seasons. So that's a safe bet to continue. He's going to remain, one of, if not the best running quarterback in the NFL. I mean, last year felt disappointing for Lamar Jackson. Maybe it's because he, missed the final month plus of the season. But in those 11 healthy games you talked about, he was quarterback 4 in fantasy points per game, behind only Josh Allen, Tom Brady, Justin Herbert. Lamar Jackson was just ahead of Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray in fantasy points per game. So he was still awesome. Again, that was largely fueled by the rushing production. His PFF passing grade has actually declined now each year since 2019. He was 22nd out of 31 qualifiers last year. I just think Lamar is what he is at this point as a passer. He's probably a league average passer. But you throw on the rushing ability, and I think he's a safe bet for top 5 production, and he does have the potential to finish as a top 1 or 2 quarterback in fantasy.
And it's certainly still early enough in his career that he could still improve as a passer. Things have changed plenty around him. So, as long as we don't go in saying, oh, this is the year that he really blows it up as a passer, I think we'll be okay, because the rushing gives him a floor, it gives him that ceiling, and then anything he can do passing is good. The passing touchdown rate came way down last year, but it was way up before that. So if that can I guess we're waiting to see what normalizing is for that. We'll see if it's in between the 2 extremes so far, or if it winds up closer to what he did last year in that category.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the biggest concern passing-wise, which we'll get into here, is, again, they lost Marquise Brown and have not added anything. So it's, Rashad Bateman, who we all like, but he's still unproven, and then Mark Andrews, and not much behind those two as far as weapons go.
On to running backs before we get to those pass catchers more. And J.K. Dobbins either will or won't be ready for the opener, depending on who you listen to, because Ian Rappaport is reporting that it doesn't sound like he'll be ready for the opener. There's a chance that he could open the season on the sidelines and maybe not be ready for a couple of games after that. Of course, then J.K. Dobbins tweeted, like, why don't you ask me? And I'll tell you, I'll definitely be ready for the opener. And frankly, regardless of what's true here, what the hell is the point of reporting this stuff without trying to talk to the player? I mean, they're so quick to try to tweet out stuff, even if it's such a minimal report like, oh, J.K. Dobbins might not be ready for the opener. Like, he doesn't have the ability to contact Dobbins and see, even if you don't believe the player's words, say,
Yeah.
oh, this is what somebody told me. This is what Dobbins told me. That's what reporting is.
Yeah, you'd think. I mean, it's a dead time of the year. I'm sure Ian's just trying to get something out there. And like you alluded to, I wouldn't expect Dobbins to say anything else. So we'll just see on this. I mean, it's interesting because, Dobbins tore his ACL on August 28th last year. And also in that Rappaport little video clip, I don't know if this was previously known and I just missed it, but Rappaport mentioned that there was also meniscus damage to Dobbins' knee. And Rappaport's actual quote was damage to the lateral side. I don't think that's like a medical term. I don't even know exactly what that means. But I mean, the takeaway is it was more than just an ACL. And that makes sense considering he's 11 months removed from it now. And he's still, not ready to go. Or usually it's, 9, maybe 10 month injury. So, just Dobbins' status up in the air. I think his effectiveness early in the season is up in the air. And even beyond the knee stuff, like I have concerns with Dobbins, not as a player, but as far as the situation goes. The biggest one is just the lack of pass catching upside. Greg Roman's offenses have historically not targeted the running backs. Lamar Jackson, as a running quarterback, we know those guys tend to target running backs at a lower rate. So that's just kind of what has me not as excited as some people about Dobbins' fantasy upside, even when he is healthy.
And we all know that he's a talented player, but we don't know yet how much of the rushing share the Ravens want to give him. Because the last time we actually saw J.K. Dobbins playing football, Gus Edwards was getting the ball more often than we all wanted him to. So maybe that's where Baltimore wants it. I throw in, too, that even if his knee is good by the opener, history tells us that running back is one of the toughest positions for coming back next season from that ACL tear. So, I mean, put it all together, and I'm just not going to be on J.K. Dobbins at all this year. I mean, there might be a share here or there, but I'm not worried about missing out on something special from Dobbins this year. He's been one of the easiest fades for me, regardless of what his price has been through draft season.
Yeah, now we'll see what happens to his ADP if, that Rappaport report kind of takes off and he starts dipping. But yeah, as of now, I have not drafted a single share of Dobbins. I haven't really even come close. And I'm not too worried about not having any Dobbins.
Gus Edwards, of course, also coming off an ACL tear. It doesn't sound like they're as worried about him, but maybe there's just not as much talk about him because he's Gus Edwards. He's not as exciting as J.K. Dobbins. He's a decent player, even at full health. Really, though, I have taken maybe minimally more Gus Edwards than I have J.K. Dobbins because of him going much later and because of the concerns with Dobbins' knee. But overall, this is not a backfield where I'm targeting either of those players.
Yeah, I'm with you, largely because I have the same concern with Edwards' his pass catching upside as Dobbins. Edwards' upside is even lower. So, Dobbins has kind of shown he can do it. Edwards, doesn't even do it when he gets a chance. His ACL tear happened a couple of weeks after J.K. Dobbins, but it sounds like Edwards was a clean tear. So it does sound like he's ahead of Dobbins in his recovery. And he was awesome in 2020. Edwards actually beat J.K. Dobbins in PFF rushing grade that year. So, I mean, I think Dobbins is, trending towards becoming a better player. But you factor in, coming off the knee injury and the fact that Gus Edwards is a nice runner. Again, I think even when Dobbins is healthy, it's going to be some sort of committee in this backfield.
I agree. And the fact that both of those guys are coming off ACL tears makes Tyler Beatty at least worth talking about. The pro for him, a workhorse final season at Missouri. He, of course, is a rookie now. 1,604 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns, 6.0 yards per carry that season. 304 receiving in that year as well. 126 career receptions, in 4 seasons at Missouri. The con on him, just 5'8", 197. So he's like Tyler Ervin size. Did run a 4.45 second 40 in pre-draft testing. So I'm going to be watching the knees and considering Tyler Beatty very late in drafts as I approach the season. And then if both Dobbins and Edwards are ready to go, Beatty's an easy cut at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and despite that massive senior season, he fell to the 6th round of the NFL draft. You look at some of the PFF grades and the efficiency stuff, and Beatty was just mediocre last season. So, I think his season was more a result of the big volume he got. And at his size, I don't think he's going to be a big volume guy in the NFL. He almost, to me, looks like a change of pace pass catching back, but this is not the offense you want to be a change of pace pass catching back in. So not super excited about Beatty, but I mean, if for some reason, Dobbins and Edwards aren't ready for the start of the season, then, Beatty might play a role that we're interested in.
Right. If he was 15 or 20 pounds heavier, I think he'd be a lot more interesting. Probably would have gone earlier in the draft too.
Yep.
On to the pass catchers, and we usually start with wideouts, but Mark Andrews is the primary guy here. Led all tight ends in target share last year, 14th in that category across positions, 26.5% share. That's up from 23.7 in 2020, 23.4 in 2019. Those were both adjusted for games that he missed, but probably the biggest factor working for him last year was that extreme rise in pass rate for the team. As we mentioned, up from 44% the previous 2 years to 56% last year. So Mark Andrews got 2.5 more targets per game than his previous high last season, 2 more receptions per game than his previous high. And of course, with that, his yards per game came way up versus the previous 2 seasons.
Yeah, I looked at Mark Andrews' pass routes run per game. It was 19.7 in 2019, 25 in 2020, and then 36.6 last year. So you said it was just the Ravens threw more. Andrews was in a pass route, percentage-wise, a bit more than he was the previous 2 seasons. So that helped too. But it was really just a volume thing for Andrews. Like he had been an elite producer on a per target, per route basis the previous couple of years. He just got more volume. That led to the massive fantasy season. So, it all comes down to what you believe the Ravens offense is going to be. If it's going to be closer to last year as far as run pass split, then Andrews can contend with Travis Kelce for the top of the position in fantasy points. If it goes back to what it was the previous 2 years, then I think Andrews is a tier below Kelce and more in the Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller tier.
Yeah, and of course, we'll talk about that ADP a little bit more and how that affects whether to believe in either way. Because if we both believe that it's going to be somewhere in between, then the question becomes, how do you value him? And the ADP is going to factor in there. On the wideout front, though, Rashad Bateman is the de facto number 1 now that Marquise Brown has been traded away. Tied for 64th in PPR points per game last year. Tied for 57th in expected PPR points per game. So a little bit under expectation in performance there. I'm sure the quarterback play didn't help that. And Jared, we have been talking some about Bateman behind the scenes in relation to Marquise Brown last year. Marquise Brown, 24th in points per game in PPR scoring last year, 11th in expected points per game. So it speaks to some of the upside available.
Yeah, because if you remember, Brown dropped like 3 or 4 touchdowns last season. A few of them were long ones. So he definitely underperformed his usage, which the numbers do show. And even if you just look at Marquise Brown's 11 games with a healthy Lamar Jackson, he was 11th in half PPR points per game in those 11 games. He was also 11th in expected half PPR points per game in those games. So it is definitely, as of now, we'll see, I guess the 2 guys out there that Baltimore could still add that would impact Rashad Bateman's role would be Julio Jones and Will Fuller. Even those guys obviously come with questions. But as of now, Bateman's set up to play, I think, at least a similar role to what Brown did last year, with that 25% target share. Bateman himself still unproven in the NFL. Like, as you said, there's nothing really to point to last year to get excited about. But I mean, you definitely need context. Bateman had the August 10th groin injury. He needed surgery, missed, the rest of training camp, all the preseason, missed the first 5 games of the season. Then he returns for the final 12 games, and he's missing Lamar Jackson for about half of those. So, it would have been tough to expect him to do much more than he did. But he was a great looking prospect coming out of Minnesota. Awesome college production throughout his 3 seasons there. Didn't test great, but definitely looked good on film. I remember kind of comping him to like a Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams type of player where he's not going to win with athleticism, but he's crafty. He's a good route runner, reliable hands. So I'm excited about Bateman. As long as Baltimore does not add one of these bigger name free agents, I think he's set up for a big role in this passing game.
Did play both inside and outside in college. Like you said, you don't point to anything from last year and say that's why he's going to be awesome this year, but it was a decent year when you consider all the context. Started the year injured, still managed to come on and work as the number 2 wide receiver, was in like the 16 to 18% target share range for most of that. So that's not a big number, but it's an okay number when you're joining an offense that's got Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews already in place. And obviously Marquise Brown leaving now leaves that opportunity behind, and you hesitate to give that target share lead to somebody who hasn't given you reason to believe it's there, but
Yep.
Bateman brings that college profile that says it could be in front of him. So he certainly hasn't shown it yet. In fantasy, sometimes we have to bet on somebody before they show it. Otherwise, we miss out on when they show it for that first time. So there's upside to him, and we'll talk more about where he belongs in drafts as we get to the ADP section. Joining him at the wide receiver core, though, Devin Duvernay is heading into his 3rd season with the Ravens, a speedy guy, former 3rd-round pick, can play inside and outside. John Harbaugh has talked him up this offseason, but the kind of pull back on that, if you do start getting excited about Duvernay, is that most of his college career was pretty quiet until he had a monster year as a 22-year-old senior.
Exactly. Yeah. Just 70 total catches across his first 3 seasons at Texas. Then he busted out for 106 catches as a senior, as you mentioned. Did get the 3rd-round draft capital. Had the 4.39 40 time. He's 200 pounds, 5'11", 200. So he's not a big receiver, but he's not, undersized, especially if he's going to be playing in the slot. He played 91% of his snaps in the slot in that senior year at Texas. He's been 53% of his snaps in the slot over his first 2 NFL seasons. So the Ravens have shown that they will use him on the outside a bit. As of now, I'd consider him the favorite to be Baltimore's number 2 wide receiver. I think, James Prochet is in the mix. Tylan Wallace might be in the mix. And again, I think this is a team that should add something else to the position in August. But Duvernay would be the guy who, I would bet on tepidly right now. Not a guy I'm super interested in drafting though.
Mm-hmm. James Prochet, Tylan Wallace, as you mentioned, both of those guys had better college runs overall than Devin Duvernay did. Neither is anywhere near as fast as he is. Prochet was an old prospect, broke out in his first year at SMU, but was already 20 years old at that point. So that, tapers the excitement for it a little bit. Wallace broke out at 19 at Oklahoma State, then tested terribly at the end of his college career, landed in round 4, did nothing as a rookie. So nothing exciting about either of those guys, but they're not guys to forget about in this competition. I'll be mildly interested to see how things sort out and who there might be preseason or training camp buzz on among those 3. But I agree that there's not enough among any of the 3 of them to truly get excited, which of course is another, at least semi-mark in Bateman's favor.
For sure, yeah. The Athletic named Prochet the Ravens standout of minicamp and OTAs for whatever that means. I don't think it means a whole lot.
He's that kind of guy that can stand out in those spring workouts, a slot guy who's just like, you're like, he catches everything. He's always open. It's like, it's kind of because he plays a role where they're allow him to be open. But, there's some value to that. I think that it would be a more interesting competition if this were a higher volume passing offense.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure the Ravens' number 2 wide receiver is going to matter in fantasy, as long as Bateman and Andrews are healthy.
Yeah. ADP review, Lamar Jackson is at QB4. That seems fair. 51.3 overall, kind of right in the range where I think he belongs. It depends on what I have drafted at that point, what is still on the board at running back and wide receiver for whether I'm taking quarterback at that point. But I'm certainly considering Lamar Jackson right there if I am looking quarterback.
Yep. He's probably my second favorite value among those top 5 quarterbacks behind Kyler Murray. But after Murray, I like Lamar Jackson. He's going like middle of the 5th round in these underdog drafts right now.
And I think it's easier even to like Lamar Jackson in those best ball tournament drafts on underdog because Rashad Bateman is stackable at wide receiver 26, whereas you have to choose between Marquise Brown, who's going a little bit expensive. We both acknowledged when we did the NFC West show, or DeAndre Hopkins, who's going to miss 6 games, and then who knows what it looks like after that. So a little bit more of a stackable situation, even if you're not taking Mark Andrews where you need to now.
Yeah, and Lamar would be just a single stack guy. Like I wouldn't even want to have Lamar plus Bateman plus Andrews. I just don't think there's enough, passing production in this offense for that to be worth it at these price tags.
And even a quarterback that you can play naked.
Yep.
At running back, we got J.K. Dobbins at RB21. It's a half round behind David Montgomery, a little more than a round behind Cam Akers, ahead of Josh Jacobs, Elijah Mitchell, A.J. Dillon. That really That's kind of the range where I'm seeing dead zone this year. It has been round 3 to 5 recently. Like I can look at those names and say J.K. Dobbins is not terrible if you compare him to those other players around him, but I would rather not be looking running back and needing a running back in that range from David Montgomery to A.J. Dillon.
Yeah, that's about where I'd place Montgomery if he wasn't coming off the ACL and that we knew he was going to be ready for week 1. Like that's where I think a fully healthy Dobbins should be going. Dobbins, yep.
And then more than a round behind Dobbins is Antonio Gibson. And to me, I'm not excited about Antonio Gibson, but if I like J.K. Dobbins, why would I not like Antonio Gibson at a discount better? He's in a better position to potentially get targets. He doesn't have a running quarterback. Like to me, Antonio Gibson he's not a better player than Dobbins, but he's healthier in that he's not coming off the ACL tear. And I think he's better situationally than J.K. Dobbins is.
Yeah, I'm taking Gibson straight up over Dobbins right now. And if you're getting the discount, it's easy.
Gus Edwards, RB49. He's in a fair range, basically tied with Tyrion Davis-Price, slightly behind Tyler Algier, ahead of Kenneth Gainwell, Khalil Herbert, Darrell Williams, James Robinson, Marlon Mack, Jamal Williams. To me, the standout guy in that range value-wise is Jamal Williams, who's nearly 2 rounds behind Gus Edwards, but I'm okay with getting some Edwards as like a 5th running back.
Yeah, Edwards is interesting to me now, mostly because I think his ADP could rise like 10 running back spots if we get to mid-late August and he's on the field, he's looking ready for week 1, and J.K. Dobbins is not. Because at that point, you could be looking at Edwards as a guy who could be giving you like RB2 numbers for the first month of the season.
Mm-hmm. Bateman, I mentioned wide receiver 26. I think that's a reasonable expectation for his output. Reasonable level to set his expectation for usage and production. And then I think he has both talent and situation upside from there, where he could just be good and could be efficient in what he gets from there and outscore that position. Or maybe they throw the ball a little bit more than we're projecting, and that gets him a little bit more from there. Overall, I think it's a range where you don't have to say Rashad Bateman breakout season to be buying some of them at that level.
Yeah, the more I dug into Brown's, Marquise Brown's 2021 season for this podcast, the more optimistic I've gotten about Bateman, just the opportunity that Brown had. And I think Bateman could certainly be, prove to be at least as talented or even more talented as Marquise Brown. So there's definitely the upside for him to beat that wide receiver 26 ADP pretty easily.
And Duvernay is the next Ravens receiver, a wide receiver 86 in underdog ADP. So you don't have to bet on any of them. It's just like, okay, I'll take him here. Maybe it's on a Lamar team. Maybe it's in a Pittsburgh stack or whatever for week 17. Mark Andrews, though, tight end 2, 20.4 overall. He's between Deebo Samuel and Tyreek Hill on the overall board. Kyle Pitts is at 33rd overall. And Jared, I think that's the big comparison for deciding how much you like Mark Andrews at cost this year.
Yeah, I don't have a strong take on Andrews or Pitts of those ADPs, which I guess means I think they're about right. I would rather take Travis Kelce like at the 1-2 turn than I would Mark Andrews 7 or 8 picks later, or Kyle Pitts in the mid 3rd round. So I don't have a ton of Mark Andrews, but I think he's fairly priced.
I think among the 3 that Kyle Pitts, if he gets to the 3-4 turn, is my favorite. And I'm okay with waiting to see if he gets there because I'm also okay with missing out on that range and taking a tight end after that. Andrews, I can't say that he's a bad pick there, but I don't think that he's going to deliver value from that spot. And more so than him versus tight ends, it's just a matter of you have to take him over, some potential workhorse running back, some potential target share eaters at wide receiver. So I just rather take one of those guys there than Mark Andrews.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the way Andrews produced last year would make him a 1st round value this year. So you're getting a little discount for some regression. Maybe the Ravens pushing back towards the run a little bit, but again, if they push all the way back or even close to all the way back, then Andrews is going to have a really tough time paying off that ADP.
And I will add that if he's in that early 2nd round range in FFPC drafts, then I think that's a fair range to be considering him.
Oh yeah, but he's not, right? I think he's like a late 1st in FFPC.
That's what I figured. Which, if you're picking him 10th or what would it be, 13th or 14th, 15th, whatever, not a whole lot of difference. You're basically choosing from the same guys around that turn.
Yep. Yeah, he is. He's 111 in best ball ADP on FFPC.
Yeah, I would say that's fair in the tight end premium format. So we'll see what I think as I get to my main event draft for the FFPC this year. But for now, we'll move on to the Cincinnati Bengals, who also have no coaching changes of note. We're in the 4th year now of Zach Taylor as head coach, 4th year of OC Brian Callahan. The offense jumped last year from 26th and 29th in yards the 2 prior seasons to 13th, from 30th and 29th in scoring the 2 previous years to 7th. It was the first full season of Joe Burrow. It was the first year for some kid named Jamar Chase, who was pretty good. We actually saw a dip in pass rate overall, though, versus 2020, down to the team's lowest pass rate since 2016.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that was well, we can get into it. It was, early in the season, or early for most of the season, they were low. Then they kind of spiked late in the year. From week 16 through the Super Bowl, they went much pass heavier. Yet the other dip was in play volume, just 61.5 offensive snaps per game for the Bengals last year. They were at 65.6 plays per game and 65 plays per game in Zach Taylor's first 2 seasons as head coach. So those were the 2 things: the play volume, then the spike in pass rate late in the season. That, when I started doing projections, I kind of thought I was going to be off this Bengals passing game, because the efficiency stuff for all of these guys was like off the charts. It's going to be tough for Burrow and Chase, especially, to match last year's efficiency. But I have the Bengals projected to throw it quite a bit more this year than they did last year. I think they're going to throw at a higher rate. And I also think they're going to run quite a bit more plays than they did last year.
Yeah, overall, the situation neutral pass rate was down from 8th in 2020 to 13th last year, but it picked up as the season went on, as you said. For example, from when T. Higgins returned from his early season shoulder injury in week 5, from that point on, they were 8th in situation neutral pass rate. They especially started throwing the ball at the end of the year in the games that got them into the playoffs and then got them to the Super Bowl. So we'll see whether they stick with that. It certainly seems like there's reason to. So Let's hope. I think to this point, Zach Taylor, I still don't believe that he's a help for any offensive pieces. Maybe they at least have enough talent, which they have tons of on that offense now. Maybe there's just so much talent that the coaching doesn't really matter for our fantasy production.
Yeah, just get out of the way, Zach. Let Joe and Jamar and T do their thing. Yeah, so I mean, the Bengals finished last year at 58.3% pass. I projected them at 61% pass this season, so a pretty big jump, and it makes them, in my projections, one of the pass heavier offenses in the NFL.
Yeah, I have them at 60.5% pass, so right about the same. It matches their 2020 rate, which, I mentioned the situation neutral rate. They were, of course, trailing a lot in those games, so I think they'll pass a little bit more on purpose now. They should be a contender. They should also lean pass just overall. I mean, look at that team. If you don't lean pass with what they have on offense, then you should be fired, even if your team makes the playoffs.
And the O-line is going to be much better this year, too, which I think, will make them feel better about dropping Joe Burrow back 40 times a game. They added Lyle Collins at right tackle, guard Alex Kappa, and center Ted Karras. So, 3 spots I think should be significantly upgraded on that O-line.
Joe Burrow has been very good so far. He's still a little bit tough to judge. He made it through last season healthy, didn't miss any games after coming off the ACL tear. Of course, fair to wonder if the repaired ACL was still limiting his play some. It certainly kept him from running very much. We'll see if he adds that to his game going forward, or if he's just not going to run the ball much. He did have 7 games last year with Pro Football Focus passing grades of 80 plus. 5 of those 7 games came week 12 or later. And I mentioned week 12 because that was the game that marked him being a year beyond the ACL tear from the season before. So I think it's a small sample. Maybe it's just noise, but it's also possible that by the end of the year, which also included him working his first season with Jamar Chase, getting his first full season of action. So all these things kind of coming together. I think it's worth noting that it seems he was playing his best at the end of last season. We'll see where things go from there.
And he had a damn good season overall. I mean, Burrow finished first for the season in PFF passing grade. He was also first in the NFL in completion rate, first in adjusted completion rate, first in yards per attempt, first in adjusted yards per attempt. I mean, he finished quarterback 7 in total fantasy points. He was just 15th in total pass attempts. So, he did it on efficiency, which is a little scary. Like, again, I think all that stuff's going to regress a little bit. But I also, I believe in him as a player, obviously believe in the weapons. And again, I think the Bengals are going to throw it a bunch more this year than last. So, Burrow averaged 32.5 pass attempts per game last year. I have him projected for 35.5 attempts per game this year, which is a pretty big jump. So even if the efficiency does drop off a bit, that volume should help make up for it.
Yeah, and of course that particular number is a calculated guess, so we'll see about that. But at the same time, if they throw the ball less than that, it's probably because they're leading, which probably means they're playing efficiently and scoring and creating yards. So feel okay about projecting a bump in that area. There are areas for potential regression, as we've alluded to, and multiple of them. 6.5% touchdown rate last year, 70.4% completion rate, 8.9 yards per attempt. I think he's well set up to be near or at the top of the league in completion rate and yards per attempt. There's still room for a slight drop there. The touchdown rate, I think, is the one that watch the most, because you just don't normally get quarterbacks staying at or above 6%. We do have some guys who can do it. Maybe he's Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers in that particular area. He's got the wide receivers to do it. But last year, Joe Burrow ranked just 18th in percent of pass attempts thrown into the end zone, tied for 10th in touchdowns on such plays. So highly efficient on those, scored more touchdowns than he should have based on how many pass attempts he was throwing in that range. Again, got the star receivers, and he was toward the top of the league in average depth of target. So should be efficient in terms of production.
The reason he isn't higher in our rankings, and I don't think he has upside to the top of the position, is because he's not going to give you big rushing pressure. Maybe he gives us a bit more this season, another year removed from the ACL, but he's not going to be up there with your Kyler Murray's, Jalen Hurts, even Josh Allen as far as rushing production goes. So that's what keeps him in the outside that top tier quarterbacks for me.
Mm-hmm. Running back Joe Mixon, 4th in PPR scoring last year, tied for 6th in points per game, 4th in half PPR and non-PPR points per game, 2nd in the league in carry share, behind only Najee Harris. So he was ahead of Jonathan Taylor in that category, despite sitting out the finale and being limited by an ankle a little bit through the middle of the season. Mixon was closer to average in the underlying metrics, Jared, but I mean, he was the guy that we always talk about him being in terms of fantasy production last year.
Yeah, that was a fun season after being on Mixon for the previous few years and him disappointing a bit. He definitely delivered last year. He did overachieve his usage. So he was you said RB4 in half PPR points per game. He was RB10 in expected half PPR points per game. Most of that, overachieving came in the touchdown department. He scored 13 rushing touchdowns versus just 10 expected scores. He had a career high 4.5% rushing touchdown rate. NFL average is around 3.3%. So he definitely scored at a higher clip than average. He's also in an awesome offense, and he's a big time talent. So I think he does have big touchdown upside again this season. We'll see about the receiving stuff. I mean, he was okay in that department last year. He was good enough. I still think there's room for more. Mixon was 28th among RBs in targets, 16th in catches, 19th in receiving yards. But the Bengals were not using him on third downs. They were, putting Samaje Perine on the field over Joe Mixon on third downs, which seems crazy to me. But we can't complain. Again, Mixon put up the nice fantasy production last year. I do think his ceiling is obviously capped if he's not going to get those third down snaps. But again, being a workhorse ball carrier in this Bengals offense behind what's going to be a much better run blocking O-line too. I think Mixon's set up for another nice season.
He could have top 3 upside if they gave him more of those passing down snaps. I don't know if they'll want to. I do know that at the end of last year, they gave him more. So through week 15, Mixon had 7.7% target share. From week 16 on, and that's through the playoffs, he was at 15.3%, which is a large number for a running back. I certainly wouldn't expect him to be at 15.3% for this season. But if we can cut it somewhere in between 15.3 and 7.7, that would certainly help a guy who, as you mentioned, already had good luck on touchdowns. And I think he's well set up to continue having good luck on touchdowns because he's the best running back in the backfield. He's on what should be one of the best offenses. There should be scoring opportunities. So, I mean, Mixon, I think right now he is in a range where he belongs, and certainly a guy that I still think has upside among those players that he's around in ADP.
Yeah, not as big a value as he was last year, but I guess I'm surprised he's not going a bit higher in drafts after the year he's coming off of. And Mixon turns just 26 in a few days, actually. So not worried about decline for him yet.
Pass catcher group, Jamar Chase. This time last year, I was like, rookie has never done what people are drafting him to do at ADP. I was wrong. I should have drafted some Jamar Chase because he just is that absolute top shelf, can't miss prospect that many said that he was heading into last season.
Yeah, third most PPR points per game by a rookie since the NFL merger in 1970, behind only Odell Beckham and Randy Moss. Had the most receiving yards by an NFL rookie. Top 10 among qualifying wideouts in both PFF receiving grade and yards per route run. And the only scary thing about Chase is that he finished fifth in half PPR points per game last year. He was just 21st in expected half PPR points per game. The point differential between his actual points and his expected was the second biggest behind only Deebo Samuel. So he really overachieved his usage. I mean, he's an elite talent, so he's going to be much more efficient than your average wideout. And I also think, again, the Bengals are going to throw more this year. So even if Chase's share of the passing game stays the same, he's going to get more targets because the Bengals are going to throw more. So I'm obviously not going to bet against the guy, despite the fact that he had all these crazy efficiency numbers last season.
Yeah, and that's the thing with him is none of us are betting against Ja'Marr Chase, the player, at this point. But to draft him now, you also have to bet that the Bengals are going to throw the ball a lot more, or you're just betting that he's going to have crazy efficiency, which is not a good bet on anybody because nobody can be counted on for crazy efficiency every single season. So we'll see where this goes. I'm very interested to see exactly how Ja'Marr Chase's season plays out because it's not, it's not hard to imagine him disappointing relative to ADP, like kind of similar to what Stephon Diggs did last year, where he didn't have a bad year, but because everybody jumped him into round one, it felt more disappointing than it really was.
Yeah, I love Chase. I think to me he's the clear number 3, but he's the clear number 3. Like I do prefer Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson over him pretty easily. I get the idea if you're playing in a bunch of these best balls, you want to diversify and maybe you get some Chase. But if I'm just in one draft and I'm taking one of those wideouts, I'm taking Kupp and Jefferson over Chase.
Yeah, I think that he is more in the mix with the guys behind him than he is closer to Jefferson Kupp. I agree with that. T. Higgins is maybe at least a small part of the reason why you'd like to say that both guys can earn targets, and there are enough to support both of them. But, most wide receivers, like most number 1 wide receivers, don't have a number 2 as good as T. Higgins competing for stuff. And T. Higgins has been good through a couple of years now.
I mean, last year, despite Chase's historic rookie season, Higgins 12th among receivers in half PPR points per game. He was 20th in expected half PPR points per game, so he overachieved too. But T. Higgins finished ahead of Ja'Marr Chase in expected half PPR points per game. And this is one of my favorite stats I've seen this offseason. It's from CBS's Jacob Gibbs. He's an awesome follow on Twitter. He's like underrated. He should have more followers. So he looked at Chase and Higgins were on the field together for 469 routes last year. Higgins saw 108 targets to Chase's 93 on those 469 routes. And Higgins also scored more PPR points than Chase on those routes. So I'm not going to argue that Higgins is a better receiver than Chase. I think, Chase is still getting better. Higgins is too, but Chase is a better receiver, I think. But the gap is not that big. And, both these guys can be top 12 wide receivers as they were last year.
Yeah, and you can listen to a stat like that. It is a great stat, by the way. You can listen to a stat like that and say, all right, nerds, you're getting too far into it. Ja'Marr Chase was awesome. He's going to stay awesome. But we're at a level here where we're splitting hairs when we're talking about whether to draft Ja'Marr Chase. Because like I said, nobody's against the talent. It's just a matter of whether you have to take him in the middle of round 1. So It's something to pay attention to. It wouldn't be out of the question. It's not like if T. Higgins finishes this season with more fantasy points than Ja'Marr Chase, you can't look back on that and say, oh my God, where did that come from? There was absolutely no signal that could happen.
Yeah. And a last note on Higgins, he played almost the entire season with a shoulder injury that required surgery after the Super Bowl. He hurt that shoulder in week 2. He missed, what was it? The next 2 games, I think. Then he played through it the rest of the year. He is expected to be a full go for training camp, so the shoulder shouldn't be a concern this year, but worth noting that he was playing through it all last season.
How good those 2 players are makes Tyler Boyd really an afterthought at this point. And you'll still find people talking about how he's a best ball value. He's fine where he's going, but there's also basically no upside here unless one of those 2 guys goes down, because Tyler Boyd, much more than either Ja'Marr Chase or T. Higgins, needs target volume, and he's just not going to get it now.
Yeah, Boyd was wide receiver 38 and half PPR points per game. But if you remove the 2 games that T. Higgins missed, Boyd drops to 46th in half PPR points per game. And he was 67th in expected half PPR points per game in those games, with T. Higgins. So he was another guy like Higgins and Boyd, like Higgins and Chase, overachieved the usage he got Maybe that continues because this offense is going to be awesome again. And again, the increased pass volume would help Tyler Boyd. He's okay as a best ball pick, but I think I'm with you that in lineup setting leagues, you're going to need a Higgins or Chase injury to really feel good about starting Boyd.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not saying don't draft Tyler Boyd, but don't draft Tyler Boyd and say, aha, I stole him from you guys, because that's just not what he is at this point.
Yeah.
Hayden Hurst is the new tight end. I think he's their new tight end, not because they targeted Hayden Hurst, but because they want to not spend too much money on Hayden Hurst. And he has already been given up on by first the team that drafted him in the first round, and then the team that traded a second round pick to acquire him.
Yeah. So Hurst is stepping in for CJ Uzomah, who was Cincinnati's lead tight end last year. And Uzomah only finished 26th among tight ends in half PPR points per game. He was 29th in expected points per game. He was 21st among tight ends in targets. The one thing you can point to from Uzomah's 2021 season to get kind of excited about Hurst is that Uzomah was 5th among tight ends in pass routes. So he was out on the field. If you think Hurst is good enough to command more targets than CJ Uzomah, then maybe he finishes quite a bit higher. I'm not sure Hurst is significantly better than CJ Uzomah, despite the fact that he was for some reason a first round pick back in 2018.
I mean, the free agent market tells us that the league certainly doesn't think Hayden Hurst is better than Uzomah. Maybe it's just the Jets that thought Uzomah was worth that much money, but I got to think that there's at least some market research that goes into the 3-year contract they gave him versus the 1-year contract that Hayden Hurst got from Cincinnati. So I would not expect bigger numbers from Hurst than we got from Uzomah last year. So there's really nothing exciting. So moving on to the ADP review section, and Joe Burrow is at QB7, which just happens to be right where he sits in our quarterback rankings. If you look at draftsharks.com right now, 71.2 in overall ADPs, 1 round behind Kyler Murray, less than a round behind Jalen Hurts, just ahead of Russell Wilson and Trey Lance, a little bit more than a round ahead of Tom Brady, more than a round ahead of Dak Prescott, and 2 rounds ahead of Matthew Stafford. Jared, I think it's an okay range for Joe Burrow. I think 2 things keep me from actually targeting him, though. 1, I don't think there's a huge difference between him and Matthew Stafford besides the 2-round difference in ADP. And 2, it's a very expensive stack to get Joe Burrow and either of the Cincinnati wide receivers in those best ball tournament drafts on Underdog.
Yeah, I mean, in a vacuum, I definitely prefer Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Trey Lance at ADP. I think Burrow is fine where he is. If I land on Jamar Chase, at cost, if I get him at 5th or 6th overall, or if I get T Higgins, near the 2-3 turn, and I can get Burrow, at or around ADP, I'll do it. But otherwise, he's not like a standalone fantasy target for me. Again, it's just because of the rushing. He doesn't have that ultimate ceiling.
Yes, I agree with that. He's somebody I'll consider if I get one of the top 2 wide receivers for them. And, for what it's worth, he has come down a little bit from where he opened draft season back in like February when we were all on Bengals high. He was quarterback 4, I believe, in the earliest of Underdog drafts, which was crazy. So I'm glad that there's been some sense added to the collective. Joe Mixon, RB7, as I mentioned, he's in that late round 1 range. Actually can get into round 2. I like him where he's going.
Yeah, again, he's closer to where he should be than where he was last year, but I still think he's slightly undervalued there. And yeah, he's a guy I definitely like if I'm picking near that 1-2 turn.
Jamar Chase, wide receiver 3 in the middle of round 1. T Higgins, wide receiver 10. Just behind him are AJ Brown, both Chargers, Michael Pittman. So I think it's a fair range for T Higgins. And then Tyler Boyd, wide receiver 51, which I think is a fair range for him too.
Yep. Yeah, so we have Chase wide receiver 3, right where he's going. We have Higgins wide receiver 9, 1 spot ahead of where he's going. I believe we have Boyd wide receiver 50, which is 1 spot ahead of where he's going. So these guys are all fairly priced.
Yeah, it looks like the market is treating the Bengals just as we think that it should.
Yep.
Hayden Hurst, tight end 23. If you want to take him there, fine. It's late enough, but he's less than a round behind Evan Engram. He's less than a round and a half behind David Njoku and Noah Fant. And he is absolutely nowhere near any of those players in my personal rankings.
No, me either. I don't mind Hurst though, because I think if there's, one of these tight ends going, past tight end 20 in ADP that could score 6, 7, 8 touchdowns, it's Hurst just because the offense he's in. I actually posted that article on Draft Sharks a couple weeks ago, just looking at, the tight ends in tight end 13 to 24 ADP in that range. The ones that overachieve are usually on like top 10 offenses because they just have those touchdown opportunities. And that Hurst definitely qualifies there. So he's a guy I'll take as my 3rd tight end, maybe as my 2nd tight end behind like Travis Kelce. But yeah, I definitely, like you said, I definitely prefer Njoku and Ingram, who are going in a similar spot in EDP.
If I'm waiting to draft a tight end at that particular spot and somebody takes Evan Ingram right before it gets to me, then I'll angrily take Hayden Hurst, but that's where he is on
Exactly.
my board.
Exactly.
On to the Cleveland Browns, another team that didn't really do a whole lot on the coaching change front. We'll
Yep.
talk about what the big change is with them, but what do we have coaching wise here?
Yeah, Kevin Stefanski back as head coach, Alex Van Pelt back as OC for their third year in Cleveland. They've been remarkably consistent in their first two seasons. Cleveland's finished 20th in plays in both of those years. They've been 21st and then 24th in situation neutral pace. They've been 29th and then 27th in pass rate, 21st and then 20th in situation neutral pass rate. So, it's been a below average pace and then, a run leaning offense. And I think, as you alluded to, the question is how many games we get Deshaun Watson for, and then in those games, how much do the Browns shift towards the pass?
And that's the thing that keeps all of this from being a real stat evaluation like it is with any other team is none of us, apparently not even the NFL yet, knows how long Deshaun Watson is going to be on the field. And, we're all waiting to find that out. I haven't projected at 56-44 pass run. I don't know how much to say about why, because it could all change. I think it would be less than that if we find out tomorrow that Watson's gone for the season and it's Jacoby Brissett the whole time.
Yeah, so I'm right there at 56-44 too. And that's assuming we get 11 games of Watson. So, if we get more, that could bump up to 58, 59%. If we get no games of Watson, then I'd, go right back to the 52% pass they were at in Stefanski's first season in Cleveland. So yeah, this is obviously the toughest team in the NFL to talk about right now because it all depends on the Watson news.
And of course, Deshaun Watson, we all know he is excellent in real football. He is excellent in fantasy football. That's the only reason anybody's talking about him right now. If he were a backup quarterback, he would be out of the league right now. Cleveland never would have traded for him, and we would not care about him in fantasy drafts. But when he's on the field, he's been excellent. There are not a whole lot of strong receiving options in Cleveland, but there's enough to support him there. So if he is playing, he's probably going to be a fantasy factor.
Yeah, I mean, he was an excellent passer in his 4 years in Houston. He averaged 30 rushing yards per game over his final 3 seasons when he was the full-time starter. Watson finished 5th, 4th, and then 7th among quarterbacks in points per game those 3 seasons with the Texans. So I do think he's a top 10 fantasy quarterback, maybe even higher than that, in points per game for however many games he plays this season.
And he, you can draft him in the best ball tournaments right now because the rumors for a little while there, I think we're all assuming he was going to be out for the entire season. That seemed to be the way things were trending. The latest rumors have it more like a half a season at most. We'll see where things end up landing. I would love to know how much of that is like the NFL floating things to see what would get them in the most trouble and what people could choke down. I mean, regardless, it feels absolutely gross to draft Deshaun Watson right now because then to put him on one of those tournament teams, you have to root for the NFL to bring him back much sooner than they will Calvin Ridley, who just bet on a football game while he was not playing football. So, I mean, everything about the Deshaun Watson situation is just like, I don't know, stomach churning, I guess.
Yeah, maybe I'm an a-hole, but I am able to separate that stuff from my fantasy teams. I mean, we don't know any of these guys. Any of these guys could be bad dudes. So I don't know. I think all the off-field stuff aside, I think Watson is actually an excellent pick in these best ball tourneys right now because he has that massive upside. And, if he plays this season, it's going to be at the tail end where all that money is in underdog and in the FFPC best ball tournament. So I've been drafting a lot of Deshaun Watson, not saying I support the guy off the field, but I do think he's a good fantasy football pick.
I would say regardless of where the suspension ends up, I would not put him on lineup setting teams because I think you can be okay without, even if he gets to like QB 20 range, I don't think you need to sit that guy on your bench because you're obviously going to need to start to pick somebody who's starting the beginning of the season for you. I just think that there are better options and better ways to spend that roster spot than to wait on a quarterback who, as good as he is, still will be getting used to a new place and a place that has been run heavy over the past couple of years under Kevin Stefanski. So perhaps not a ceiling inducing situation for Deshaun Watson's fantasy upside.
Well, he hasn't played football in a year either, which is a factor. Now he has been practicing with the Browns. They've let him do that this whole time, so he's at least been getting comfortable in the offense.
All right, let's move on to the guys that we know are expected to play in week 1. Running back, where Nick Chubb, the pro is that he's awesome. The con is that he plays a position where that doesn't matter quite as much as it does at other positions. And the problem there is, Nick Chubb is good enough that if he were commanding Derrick Henry level usage, then we'd be like, okay, Nick Chubb, first round, that's fine. He ranked 14th in the league in opportunities per game last year, 18.1 combined carries and targets per contest, 14th in that category overall over the 2 seasons under Kevin Stefanski, 14th at the position last year in total opportunity share, just 27th in red zone snap share, despite ranking 15th in total run play snaps. So even the Browns don't want to put him on the field enough, give him the ball enough to be a dominant force and control games.
And all those, volume stats you mentioned, that was despite Kareem Hunt missing a bunch of time last year. Hunt and Chubb were really only healthy together for the first 5 games of last season. In those games, Chubb averaged 18 carries in those games, but just 1 target per game across those 5 games. He was 16th among running backs in expected half PPR points in those 5 games. He was 9th in actual half PPR points. So he's going to be more efficient than average because, as you said, he's an awesome player. He just doesn't, he hasn't got the passing stuff throughout his career. And last year he averaged 1.4 catches per game, despite, again, Kareem Hunt being out for a lot of that. And then he doesn't get the massive rushing workloads because Kareem Hunt is there. And he's a pretty good player as well.
And he gets some bump if Kareem Hunt goes down, but still isn't controlling targets in that case. So it doesn't have that upside if Kareem Hunt goes down. So, it's just not quite enough to get excited about Nick Chubb wherever he's going in round 2. And he usually stays in round 2, maybe early round 3. If he gets to round 3, fine. Yeah. But that's got to happen for him to actually be enticing.
Yeah, he is, I believe, like about a half round cheaper this year than he was last year. Wasn't he going like mid-second last year?
I think so.
And this year on like underdog, he's a 2-3 turn pick, and he does get into the early or mid 3rd round sometimes.
Yeah, I can certainly see him there. I will not fault anybody for taking Nick Chubb in round 3. Kareem Hunt finished last season 21st in PPR and half PPR points per game, 31st in expected PPR points per game. So outperformed that. As you mentioned, did have, I believe it was a calf injury last year, right?
The calf knocked him out for a bunch of time. He also had wrist and knee injuries early in the season. He had an ankle injury late in the season. So Hunt only he appeared in 8 games last year. He was really only even close to healthy for the first 6. One of those came without Nick Chubb. In those 5 games where Chubb and Hunt were healthy, Hunt was actually 6th in half PPR points per game, but he was just 21st in expected points per game. He averaged 11 carries and 4.2 targets in those 5 games. I think that's about what you're looking at this season, which puts him on that border where he's tough to count on in season long, but you do know he's going to give you some spike weeks because again, he is a good player. He has that passing down role. And then if Chubb misses time, Hunt's a high end handcuff as well.
Yeah, get ready to drink because he's better in best ball. We have Dearness Johnson there, and he got 3 games of lead back work last year, 19 plus carries in all 3 of those games, 99 plus rushing yards in all 3 of those, single-digit touches in the rest of the games. He's interesting if Kareem Hunt gets traded, and there was a decent amount of time so far this offseason. I'm not sure where public opinion is right now overall, but there are a lot of people expecting Kareem Hunt to be gone and even talking about him being cut. Cleveland has no reason to cut Kareem Hunt. He's not costing them too much. They have enough money. Where I could see him moving on this offseason is if another team has an injury or just gets close to the season and realizes it needs more at running back. I could see them trading Kareem Hunt because his contract's up after this season. So he could potentially be worth more to them in that trade than he would be playing out the season.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And in that case, Dearness Johnson would be interesting in fantasy. Maybe you're picking Johnson now to try to get ahead of that. But I don't think Johnson is going to be a fantasy factor if Chubb and Hunt are on this roster this season. Johnson's he looked good in those few games. He got significant opportunity. I think the takeaway though is that it's not hard to look good in this offense. It's a good system. It's one of the best O lines in the NFL. So it's a good spot for the running game. The other thing here too we haven't talked about is again if Watson plays all or most of the season, if we do think that's going to mean more passing, for the Browns. That hurts the running backs, especially Nick Chubb, who, isn't going to do much in the passing game, and maybe his rushing volume declines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a good situation for running backs as long as you don't have to pay too much for him. We'll talk about ADP in a minute. Amari Cooper is the new number one wideout. He's certainly waiting to see who the quarterback's going to be. And, assuming that Deshaun Watson is going to miss at least a large chunk of the season, only further hurts a guy that really is iffy to begin with. So Amari Cooper has been a talented player. He's had plenty of pockets of production, but he has never been a target hog at any point. He's been with two teams now. Looking by year, and I've got this in his player profile on DraftSharks.com rankings page or the Amari Cooper player page. Starting with 2015 in Oakland, at that point, 21.5% target share, 22.1, 22.4, 20.3 in that year that he split between Oakland and Dallas, 19.9 with the Cowboys, 20.3 in Dallas, and then 19.7% last year for the Cowboys. So just a guy that has always gotten either low wide receiver 1 level target share or wide receiver 2 level. So even though he's in a place now where he should be the number one guy, and maybe he gets to 24 plus, he has yet to be the guy that gets that. So if targets are earned, Cooper's not really earning them yet.
Right now we have 44% of Cleveland's 2021 targets are gone. And we'll talk about the guys behind him, Amari Cooper, but it's Donovan Peoples-Jones and rookie David Bell and Anthony Schwartz. So there's definitely a chance Cooper sets a career high in target share this season. I don't know if betting on it is smart, for a guy who's about to turn 28 years old or turned 28 years old last month. Again, like the rest of the team, Cooper's fantasy value comes down to how many games he has Deshaun Watson for, because Jacoby Brissett as the backup, it's not going to be pretty if that's Cooper's quarterback.
And he absolutely should set a career high in target share this year. He played with the Raiders. He played with Michael Crabtree. With the Cowboys, it was Michael Gallup, and then CeeDee Lamb arrived. So there are plenty of challengers for targets. Now, the whole thing about targets being earned is we don't want to blame too much on the situations. But everybody in Cleveland besides Amari Cooper is not close to the level of Crabtree, Gallup, CeeDee Lamb. So there should be a bump there. Of course, that is then balanced negatively by what should be a low volume pass offense and the quarterback question. So it keeps you from getting excited overall for sure. The other wideouts in this offense, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Bell, look like the other two among the top three. I can't say that I'm excited about either guy, especially given the situation.
Well, DPJ is my guy. So I still have some interest in him. Again, if Deshaun Watson is there, Donovan Peoples-Jones, 11.55 yards per target over the past two seasons, second highest among 136 receivers with 50-plus targets over that span. Now, he's not nearly as high in yards per route run, which we know is much more predictive than yards per target. But the yards per target speaks to Peoples-Jones' downfield ability. His average depth of target the last 2 years, 17.6 yards as a rookie, 15.6 yards last year. So he is that deep ball guy. And Deshaun Watson's a good deep ball passer. He was second in PFF deep passing grade in 2019, 10th in 2020. So I do think it's a good match between those two. And it does sound like, there was just a positive report on Peoples-Jones, the Browns being high on him. He probably has to hold off Anthony Schwartz, who the Browns took in the, third round last year. But I think DPJ is the better prospect.
He should be. I mean, we were all surprised when Anthony Schwartz went in round 3 last year. So we'll see what happens there. I will say this. I love Donovan Peoples-Jones as a best ball tournament pick this year. He's wide receiver 93 in underdog ADP right now. So, you're taking him as like your last wide receiver pick, and he's either going to give you nothing or 2 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown.
All these Browns wideouts are I think, priced as if we're going to get no Deshaun Watson or very little Deshaun Watson this season. So I think they're all going to rise if we get that Deshaun Watson news, and it's better for him than people expect.
Yeah, and we'll get to those more specific ADPs in a moment. But before that, David Njoku, franchised by the team, quickly extended 4 years, nearly $55 million on that extension. Kevin Stefanski says that Njoku has evolved into a complete tight end and will be, quote, big part of what we plan to do. The team, 2nd and 4th in tight end target share in the 2 seasons under Stefanski so far. Last year still found Austin Hooper just 22nd among tight ends in target share. David Njoku 27th. So we need to see how those things are going to combine and what role Harrison Bryant plays. But there's upside to Njoku and not too much excitement based on his ADP so far. He's also one of just 4 guys on this year's Browns team who have actually caught 100 career passes so far in the NFL. Amari Cooper, David Njoku, Kareem Hunt, and Jakeem Grant is the 4th one in that group.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised Njoku isn't getting more buzz, isn't going higher in drafts. And there's reasons to be skeptical of him. I mean, 2019 and 2020, he did absolutely nothing. He did deal with some injuries over that span. Even last year, he didn't really hit the fantasy radar, but that was because he was splitting snaps and targets with Austin Hooper. Njoku last year was 16th in PFF receiving grade and 11th in yards per route run among 35 qualifying tight ends. So he did play well. He was pretty efficient. Prior to that, 386 yards and 4 touchdowns as a rookie. That's a nice rookie season at tight end. Goes for 639 yards and 4 scores on 56 catches in his second NFL season. He finished 9th among tight ends in half PPR points that year. And then he was a first round pick in 2017. Big time athlete, 93rd percentile relative athletic score. So, and he's still just 26 years old. I believe he was 20 when he was drafted. So he is still young. I think he still might be getting better, and plenty of target opportunity this season with Austin Hooper gone and Jarvis Landry gone. And then again, it comes down to the quarterback upgrade. How many games of Deshaun Watson does David Njoku get?
Yeah, we're all like, hey, David Njoku might have a bright future. And Cleveland was like, ooh, we can get Austin Hooper and crush David Njoku's value for the next couple of years. But, it sounds like Stefanski and I assume his staff were just like, well, we don't really like where Njoku's at right now. We're going to bring in a veteran. And now they like where he's at, because signing him and trading for Amari Cooper and then, trading for Deshaun Watson, it all wound up forcing them to dump Austin Hooper. So clearly they were like, we definitely want David Njoku around, even if it means we have to give up on Austin Hooper. So I'm optimistic, and you don't have to be too optimistic to buy him at the price, which we'll get to now in the ADP review section. Quarterback, Deshaun Watson's QB 23, Jacoby Brissett's QB 36. We've talked about the why there and the what. Running back, Nick Chubb, RB 13, Kareem Hunt, RB 31. Within a round ahead of Hunt are Rashad Penny, Damian Harris, CEH, Tony Pollard. Around behind Kareem Hunt, Chase Edmonds, Devin Singletary, Kenneth Walker, Ramondre Stevenson. So I think it's a fair range. I think that Kareem Hunt smashes most of the guys there in ultimate ceiling if things break his way.
Well, I think he's right there with Pollard, I guess, as far as ceiling, if with an injury in front of him. I also think Hunt can beat running back 31 even if Chubb plays all season. I think he's good enough. He sees enough volume. The O-line's good enough ahead of him. So I think Hunt's a good pick at RB 31. And I think Chubb is right where he should be. RB 13 sounds good. I think fantasy drafters finally getting Nick Chubb right.
Yep, I think it's a fair level for him. I think it's a fair level for Kareem Hunt. I think Kareem Hunt is more attractive as a best ball running back than he is in lineup setting, because he will contribute when Chubb is injured. But in order to comfortably start him, you either need a weak running back core or a Nick Chubb injury. So I don't love having him on a lineup setting roster. I would rather have probably Damian Harris, Devin Singletary, Chase Edmonds, just looking at guys among that range that I mentioned.
That's fair for lineup setting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those guys will be more reliable week to week because they're going to get more volume.
Dearness Johnson, RB 66, so an end of the draft consideration. I know there are some who are like, I'm definitely getting Dearness Johnson. That's not my range, but I can see the logic to adding him some, especially in case Kareem Hunt gets traded. I think if you do pick Dearness Johnson, that's what you're hoping for, is a Kareem Hunt trade.
Right. He probably shoots up 15 or 20 running back ADP spots if Hunt gets traded. So that's what you're playing for by picking him there. You're playing for the Hunt trade or release.
Yeah, might even get into the 40s. And by the way, that possibility of a trade is another avenue of upside for Kareem Hunt. If you take him, that might be reason to take him even in a lineup setting. If you're doing a draft early in August, you take him and see what happens there, because it's not, it's late enough that it's not crushing you if he is just stuck with Nick Chubb going into the year.
Send him to Buffalo. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Amari Cooper, wide receiver 31, which is well below where we have him projected. I think a fair range for right now while we're waiting for the quarterback question to be answered, though.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if Watson suspended for the entire season, how much further does Cooper drop? And then if we get, a 4-game suspension for Watson, how much does Cooper rise? Like, I think he should be at least in the mid-20s if he's going to have Watson for most of the season.
Yeah, I think those are fair expectations there. David Bell is next at wide receiver 85, DPJ at wide receiver 93. Bell, I've taken him here and there. I'm not that interested because I think he needs higher volume or better efficiency, and it doesn't seem like he's well set up for either of those this year, even versus guys around him. If you like him, that's fine because it's late. But I've been largely passing. And as I mentioned, I really like DPJ as an end of draft, spike week wideout.
Yes. Yeah, glad to hear it. Yeah, I think DPJ is the better best ball pick. He's the big play guy. He's the big, fast, athletic receiver who's going to make big plays and score touchdowns. Bell could be the better option in lineup setting leagues. He could out target DPJ this season. He's probably going to have the higher catch rate. He could be more bankable from week to week.
Bell's the guy to take if you're not optimistic for Njoku and if you don't think Amari Cooper is going to set a career high in target share. Because if he doesn't, then David Bell is probably somewhere around 20%. And that's not exciting, but that's a level where he could be useful in like a wide receiver 4 for PPR range.
Yeah, it'd be awesome if he gets anywhere close to 20%.
Absolutely. Pittsburgh Steelers to round out the AFC North. Coaching changes? Nope. Mike Tomlin's in his 16th year in Pittsburgh. OC Matt Canada heads into his second season. The team actually stayed pass heavy in Canada's first year after switching from Randy Fichtner, third most pass heavy in the league, but just 17th in situation neutral pass rate, fourth in situation neutral pass rate the year before. I would bet on this year's group being closer to that 17th in that category. We'll see just how good the team is this year. Their projected win total is already down from 7.5 to 7 by Vegas numbers. That puts them well behind the Bengals at 10, Ravens at 9.5. Cleveland's off the board right now because we're all waiting to see who their quarterback's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, the question here, like you said, no coaching changes, but Ben Roethlisberger out of the picture, and how much say did he have in this offense? You read a lot of the stuff out of the Pittsburgh media, and it's like, Ben was basically calling the shots on this offense. And, they were, as you said, what were they, 63% pass last season. I projected them all the way down at 58% this year. Just again, I think that's what Matt Canada wants to be. They obviously have question marks at the quarterback positions. I think you're going to see a pretty big dip in pass volume for the Steelers this year.
I have them at 59-41 in my projection. I'm guessing they will run it more with either a recycled quarterback or a rookie quarterback versus the guy that was there forever. I also expect that either Mitchell Trubisky or Kenny Pickett will turn more dropbacks into running plays than Ben Roethlisberger did, especially the ghost of Ben Roethlisberger that we had last year. I also, though, if this team struggles, they could throw the ball more than they really want to, and the backfield remains pretty shallow behind Najee Harris.
Yep, all fair.
So, quarterback, the question is who it'll be. It didn't sound like Kenny Pickett was particularly close in the spring to overtaking Mitchell Trubisky. If it isn't overtaking, it didn't sound like he was especially close to winning the competition. So we'll see what happens as we get into summer. History says that we should expect Pickett as a first-round pick to play at some point. The Texans joined the league in 2002. That made it 32 teams in the NFL. Since then, we've had 64 quarterbacks taken in round one. The 63 of those taken before this draft class averaged a week 7 first start in the NFL. The median for that whole group was week 4. So you can point to somebody like Patrick Mahomes or even, Aaron Rodgers, Carson Wentz as guys that sat out their entire first seasons. Overall, though, it's much more likely that the first round quarterbacks play at some point.
Yeah, I expect Trubisky to start the year for Pittsburgh. I expect Pickett to make starts as well. And I would bet on Pickett making more starts than Trubisky. So if you want to dabble in this situation, I do prefer Pickett. What's working in these guys' favor is it's a pretty nice group of pass catchers. Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, they draft George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris. So it's a nice group of pass catchers. And both these guys can run a little bit. Trubisky averaged 21 rushing yards per game with the Bears. Kenny Pickett tested as a 96th percentile athlete for the quarterback position with an 80th percentile 40 time. So he didn't have big rushing numbers at Pitt, but I think he's going to add some fantasy production with his legs. So, that could make these guys, mid-range quarterback twos when they're under center. But tough to get excited about the upside. And again, you're probably not going to get a full season out of either guy.
Yeah, I would say don't get excited about anybody here, but there is some upside for super flex 2 quarterback formats. I would bet on Mitchell Trubisky myself because of really just what you said. I expect him to start the season, so I have no idea what they're going to do beyond that. I don't look at Kenny Pickett and think, well, this guy is just on the verge of taking over an NFL team. To me, he didn't look like somebody who belonged in round one. So I could see the team being like, I think he needs some time, needs a little grooming before he's ready. So I'd rather take the guy that I expect to open the year on the field and see what happens. Mitchell Trubisky has been all over the place. He has at least had pockets of fantasy production. If you look at the 4 years in Chicago, his points per game, he finished. Okay, let me try this again. His rankings in points per game for those 4 seasons, 37th, 11th, 32nd, and 14th. For that last one, it was for the 8 full games that he played for that Bears team in 2020.
Yeah, so I mean, nothing exciting there, and most of that was because of the rushing ability. Actually, Trubisky had his best PFF passing grade as a rookie. His last 3 starting seasons with Chicago, he ranked 29th, 25th, and 30th. So I just don't expect him to play well enough to hang on to the starting job for very long. And to me, like the argument for Kenny Pickett was he's this experienced college starter who's, relatively pro ready at the position. So it's like, I don't know, if he can't beat out Mitchell Trubisky as a rookie, that'd be kind of disappointing to me.
When it's usually a good sign that a quarterback arrives with lots of college experience. I don't like, though, that Kenny Pickett was kind of a forgettable dude before he had one huge year at the end of 5, or wasn't it even 6 college seasons that he was around for? I think he took a red shirt and then was around for 5 more years. It was at least 5 college years for him, though.
I think he was there 5 years and he started for 4. And then, like you said, he really did nothing noteworthy until that final year when he was a 5th-year senior.
That's how you can tell it's an exciting situation, because the argument against Kenny Pickett is, I don't think he's that good. And the argument for him is, we already know Mitchell Trubisky's not that good. So that's why you shouldn't overinvest on anybody here.
Exactly.
Mitchell Trubisky did at least top 5% passing touchdown rate twice in his 4 Bears season. So, there's something going on. And as you mentioned, the best thing in their favor is the core of pass catchers, which we'll get to. I guess we're talking about running backs first, but Najee Harris definitely factors into that pass catcher group. Was 2nd in the league in carries last year, 7th in carries per game, 3rd in opportunity share behind Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara, which were, of course, adjusted for games lost to injury, but also a very good pass catcher. And I'm not even sure that the version of Roethlisberger we got last year was able to optimize Harris's receiving, because we can see stuff on his college tape for a guy that can do downfield passing work from the backfield.
Yeah, good prospect, obviously coming off a nice rookie season. And I mean, he was a workhorse last year. So Harris, you mentioned the carries and targets. Harris led all running backs in snaps. He led all running backs in pass routes. He finished 3rd among running backs in expected half PPR points per game. He was, only 9th in actual half PPR points per game. So he did underachieve his usage. Maybe that happens again this year. I mean, I definitely have concerns with this offense, with the offensive line. The O-line wasn't good last year, and I don't think it's going to be much better, if at all, this year. But it's just, we know volume matters more than anything else, especially at running back. And I think Harris is, as safe a bet as any running back, to finish, top 3, at least top 5 in total touches this season.
Yeah, I started out a little bit wary of him at cost. I've kind of weaned myself off of that because it's just the situation. He's going to get the ball a whole lot. And I think the thing that changed most for me is worrying less about his target count than I started out, because you'd think, old, immobile quarterback, perfect for dumping off to running backs, but it's just not that simple when you look at the numbers. It's less of a downgrade in that category this year to whoever ends up being the quarterback. And the rest of the backfield also is a big mark in Najee Harris's favor, because it's still Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland behind him. Benny Snell has showed us that he's just not that good, and his work, like the number of touches the team gives him, have tailed off in recent seasons. Anthony McFarland at least has some physical talent. He's a fast dude, but has given us nothing to like in the NFL so far. You have to acknowledge that last year he tore an MCL right at the start of the season, so didn't have much of a chance to deliver anything. But I'm not hearing word out of Pittsburgh that the Steelers are like, watch out for what Anthony McFarland is going to be now that he's healthy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, McFarland's the more intriguing prospect when you just look at the profiles, but it sounds like Snell is going to at least head to training camp as the number 2 guy again. I was surprised Pittsburgh didn't add anything to this group this offseason because it is weak behind Harris. And if you're going to give Harris all those snaps and all those touches, he is obviously going to carry elevated injury risk. But yeah, I'm not drafting any of these Steelers backups at this point, at least.
I agree. So let's move on to the wide receivers. It starts with Deontay Johnson. He dominated target share in Pittsburgh last year, 28% versus just 18.1% for number 2, Chase Claypool. Ranked 6th among all wideouts in that category, ranked 8th in PPR points, 3rd in total targets, 5th in reception. So he's been climbing in that area and continued that last season.
Yeah, so I think the question with Deontay Johnson is how much of that target share was due to Big Ben and just the type of football he was playing late in his career, where he was looking to get it out, looking to throw short, and then versus how much is due to just Deontay Johnson, earning those targets, which we always talk about. If you look at Deontay Johnson's PFF receiving grades, 56th out of 84 receivers in 2020, 32nd among 89 receivers last year. He finished lower in actual points per game than expected points per game each of the last 2 years. So he's, underachieved versus usage. And the other thing to consider with Deontay Johnson is, he's going to be a free agent this offseason. There's, been talks that he's kind of interested in a new deal, but Pittsburgh hasn't really, followed up on that. Haven't really, seemed like they want to lock him up long-term. So I'm not sure Deontay is part of their long-term plans, which, I think adds some volatility to his 2022 outlook.
I agree with that. The Steelers are at least conservative relative to franchises historically in paying players. They're willing to let players go that have even been productive for them. We watched them, let Juju Smith-Schuster hit the open market each of the past 2 years, only brought him back on the 1-year deal last year. So certainly worth noting that they're like, we can lose Deontay Johnson and still be okay. So we'll see where that goes. I would still certainly bet on him beating Chase Claypool in target share, but Chase Claypool could show us, I don't know, he's probably the bigger talent physically. He could turn that into more work going forward. At the least, I think in terms of draft value between them, it's easier to like Chase Claypool for me right now, especially in best ball season.
Yeah, I'm betting on Deontay Johnson leading this team in targets too, but I don't think the gap is going to be as big as the ADP suggests right now. I'm definitely buying Claypool, largely because of the ADP you alluded to. I think he's wide receiver 50 in ADP right now. Last year was bad for Claypool, admittedly, but even last year he finished 40th among receivers in half PPR points per game. And then you can't throw out his rookie year, which was super impressive. He finished 26th among receivers that year in half PPR points per game. He was 22nd in yards per route run. Former second round pick. He's 6'4", 238 pounds, super athlete. So I'm definitely going to bet on Claypool when he's as cheap as he is right now.
And even though the target share split was large between them, 10 percentage points, the targeted air yards split was a lot closer. Right. It was, let me try to get back to him in my notes now. It was like 32% for Deontay Johnson and 27.4% for Claypool. So he gets downfield better than Deontay Johnson does. And that speaks to, I hesitate to say talent gap, but maybe that is the way to say it. Maybe there is just at least a slight talent gap, a big enough talent gap to help make Chase Claypool more intriguing at their relative prices.
Yeah, Deontay Johnson was obviously a better fit with end of career Ben Roethlisberger than Chase Claypool was. Now, I don't know if Mitchell Trubisky or if Kenny Pickett are the answer as far as getting the ball downfield to Chase Claypool, but it really can't be any worse than Roethlisberger was the past couple of years.
Yeah, it was 32% versus 27% on targeted air yards between the two of them, favoring Johnson, but closer than their target share split.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think otherwise we're talking about ADP primarily with Claypool, but I like him very much in drafts right now. Joining them in the wide receiver core, George Pickens, and then a bunch of dudes trying to win the slot spot. But I guess, that's the biggest question probably here is we like Deontay Johnson enough as a player. We like Chase Claypool enough as a player. George Pickens is talented. Who's the slot guy among them? Because none of them has been to this point, really, either in college or the pros.
Man, I hope Pittsburgh doesn't put, who isn't he? They've Gunnar Olszewski. Like, I hope they're not putting Gunnar Olszewski on the field just because he's a slot guy over George Pickens. It should be those three guys. Put him in the slot. It's not hard to go in the slot.
Mm-hmm.
Just I think Deontay could do it. I think Claypool could be your big slot. I mean, they can figure it out. Get your best three receivers on the field.
Yeah, I would think that their best option would be to move the guys around and have Johnson and Claypool be the slot co-leaders from there. Yeah, I mean, you work some of the smaller guys in, but it doesn't seem like your best option is putting Gunnar Olszewski on the field or Calvin Austin III or Anthony Miller or Steven Sims. I mean, we'll see if anybody emerges from them, but it would be annoying if one of them is the number 3 wide receiver.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, Pickens is a guy I'm super intrigued by, more dynasty than redraft. Although if you get an injury to Deontay Johnson or Chase Claypool this season, Pickens could definitely, be a fantasy factor. 52nd overall pick, despite missing basically all of last season with a torn ACL. Probably would have gone higher if it wasn't for that. But former 5-star recruit, nice athlete, had good production at Georgia before tearing the ACL. So he's a guy I'm definitely interested in. He might be a reason why the Steelers aren't, needing to bring back Deontay Johnson if they see, Pickens as the replacement starting in 2023.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe they drafted him thinking, well, this is insurance in case Deontay Johnson goes. So yeah, either way, the quarterback situation makes it easier for me to not get too excited about George Pickens this year, but certainly like the long-term outlook for him. And then Pat Freiermuth's the other name to consider among pass catchers, 13th among tight ends in PPR points and half PPR points last year, just 25th though in target share. That jumped after Juju Smith-Schuster went down 6.7% over the first 5 games with Juju, 15.1% from week 6 on, where Freiermuth saw increased playing time with no Juju on the field. That number still would rank just 17th among tight ends. So not a big enough spike to get him into the top 12, which is where he's going. 16th among tight ends in total targets, tied for 13th in end zone targets. So that's like the biggest, let's say, green flag with Pat Freiermuth is even as a rookie with Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson around, the Steelers are like, we like this guy in the end zone.
I mean, I think it was an awesome rookie season altogether. I mean, 9.5 PPR points per game for Freiermuth last year, the 4th most by a rookie tight end over the past 10 seasons, behind Jordan Reed, Evan Ingram, and then Kyle Pitts, in Freiermuth's rookie class last year. And actually, if you look from week 6 on, when his role did grow, 11.3 PPR points per game from week 6 on. That was 8th most among tight ends. So, promising start to his career, was a nice looking prospect coming into the NFL. Tough for me to get excited about this year, though, just because there's still tough target competition at wide receiver, and then we have the quarterback issues. Freiermuth's a guy I want to be betting on, especially like dynasty long term. I like him. Maybe we're too low on him for 2022, but the numbers just kind of don't work out unless you expect the Steelers offense to be a lot better than we do.
Yeah, he scored enough touchdowns last year to boost the overall outlook. So you have to really be in on him to be buying him either in dynasty or a redraft right now, because it's pushing up his price. One other area though where he could step up and where the QB change might be good for him, we talked about the solution at slot receiver. There's room for Freiermuth to be part of that slot solution. He was among 44 tight ends who saw at least 30 targets last year, according to PFF. He ranked just 27th in slot rate, 40th in outside route rate. His 32.3% slot rate last year was way down versus his 54% rate for his Penn State career. So he spent a lot more time as a slot receiver for the Nittany Lions than he did for last year's Steelers. And his average depth of target at Penn State was 9.4 yards versus 5.6 in that first year with Pittsburgh. So if we can get a little bit more time of him split away from the line, if we can get him targeted further downfield, like we said, with a quarterback that doesn't have an old broken down arm, maybe we get some more efficiency even without, solving the target share issue for Pat Freiermuth. So, there's some upside path there, even if I still stop short of being excited about him.
Right. He's a guy I've been wondering if we're too low on, just because again, the profile is really strong. Like he kind of checked all the boxes coming out of Penn State, and then he turned in a really nice rookie season. So I definitely think the future is bright for Freiermuth, even if he's not going to totally break out this year because the situation is just not going to let him.
And let's get into the ADP section, which I think allows us to talk more about whether we're too low or high on him. Quarterback, we talked about Mitchell Trubisky's at QB 31, Kenny Pickett's at QB 32. So nobody's saying this is definitely the guy. And I think that's totally fair for both of them. Whoever starts will probably give you some spike weeks here or there with rushing and with the receivers that they have to work with. Najee Harris, RB6. So we've clearly got Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey at the top. Next is more of a mix, though. Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook. Then there's Najee Harris, then Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones, Saquon Barkley. Eckler, Henry, Cook, Harris, and Mixon can kind of go in any order depending on the draft. And I think that's a fair range to consider Harris.
Yeah, I just think Harris is the safest among those guys because I just think we know the volume's going to be there. And I mean, they're all injury risks. You can argue who's riskier than the other as far as injury goes, but I think volume makes Harris safest. He might have the lowest ceiling among at least most of those guys you mentioned. But I don't know, even in these big underdog tournaments, the big FFPC basketball tournaments, like floor is still good, especially in the first round. Like all these guys have ceilings. Harris has a ceiling to finish as a top 5 fantasy back, and he has a nice floor too. So I like drafting him if I can get him in the back half of round 1.
Yeah, I think he's fair. I'm not reaching ahead of the other guys around him for him. I would mix it up. I would mix up the exposures. This is not a range where I'm saying that's definitely my guy ahead of the others, though I do like the whole collection of them, and it helps me to take Stephon Diggs in the second half of round 1. Maybe Devontae Adams. I haven't gotten to him quite as much as Stephon Diggs yet. Saquon Barkley is going to be a bar, though, that I use for a lot of guys in this range. And to me, he's very similar to Najee Harris. The only differences are, one, we've seen early in his career, like before all the injuries, Saquon Barkley is a better version of Najee Harris in that he's going to dominate rushing and receiving. And at full health, he's just a more talented player. Now, coming to this Giants team, it looks like he's in just the same situation as Najee Harris in terms of commanding work. The backfield around him is Matt Breida and a bunch of dudes that you probably didn't realize were on the Giants right now. So these two guys could be in line for very similar workloads. I'm not sure if either offense is actually going to be good. So I don't know if we get a boost in scoring opportunities there. And frankly, Harris has a better wide receiver core around him than Barkley does. So maybe that helps Barkley's target outlook. So that even helps me further to say, well, if I don't know which of these running backs I want here, I'm going to take Stephon Diggs. I'm going to take Devontae Adams. And then around the turn, I can probably at least find Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, or you can take both running backs, right? I was going to say the difference between Najee Harris and Saquon Barkley is their ADPs. And Barkley's still sitting in round 2. Now he's climbing. By the end of August, it might be a choice, Najee Harris or Saquon Barkley. And I do think they're close. I think they're similar. I think they should be going in the same range. I think Barkley should be a late first-round pick. But as of now, you can get both those guys if you want.
And I will chase Saquon Barkley wherever he goes ADP-wise this year. Normally, you say, I'm glad I got him early because he's too expensive now. I'm going to chase Saquon Barkley. I'm not going to be the guy taking him 3rd overall, but I'm going to chase him ADP-wise.
Yeah, I'll chase him to where he deserves to be chased, which, again, I think is the back half of the first round.
Absolutely. Wide receivers for Pittsburgh. Deontay Johnson is at wide receiver 20. That's fair. Chase Claypool's at wide receiver 50. I think that's a value. We have him projected as wide receiver 44. I think it's in PPR. I'm not sure. It might be half PPR. But either way, that's, I think, a fair expectation for his full season numbers. But there's spike week potential in there. And there's big upside that, he gets a little bit more target share. He gets a little bit more efficiency. He just he has, some breakthrough potential to him this season.
Yeah, wide receiver 43 and half PPR for us on Claypool. So 7 spots ahead of ADP. We have Deontay Johnson 24th and half PPR. So, 4 spots behind ADP. I'm not super interested in Johnson at wide receiver 20, especially on underdog where it's half PPR. He does have more value if you're getting the full point per reception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I take him, it's because I've waited on wide receiver and, it's a range where nobody's exciting me. So I'll take a guy who was, top 5 in targets last year.
Yep.
George Pickens, wide receiver 76, fair range if you want him. I still haven't been drafting him there. Like I said, the quarterback situation helps push me away. Pat Freiermuth, tight end 12. Same kind of deal. He's fair. I'm not targeting him because there are guys available after, and especially the guys we've talked about that are way after. Evan Ingram, Noah Fant, David Njoku.
Yeah, I mean, maybe after talking this through, I should get some shares of Freiermuth, but I haven't yet. he's just going near the top of that. I think we've talked about like a big range of tight ends, like, tight end 10 through 20. I think you can make a case for all those guys. And Freiermuth just tends to go, as one of the first two or three guys out of that tier.
Yeah, like even if we don't look too far down the list, Hunter Henry has the same kind of profile in that the biggest thing working for him is that touchdown upside. We've seen it over multiple seasons with Hunter Henry. He's got a better quarterback, I'm going to assume, Mac Jones versus whoever wins in Pittsburgh. And he's about 2 rounds behind Pat Freiermuth in ADP. So that might be the biggest single reason for me to not draft Pat Freiermuth right now.
Totally agree.
All right. Well, that's a good place to end the show then. This has been episode 6 of the divisional preview series. We have 2 more to go next week, Jared. We got the NFC East. We got the AFC East. We also have another podcast going tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be interviewing Tayshaun Reed of The Athletic, the Raiders beat writer, to continue the beat writer series. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to get his insight on what we can expect from a renovated Raiders offense.
Got to find out about that backfield. That's what I'm excited to ask Tayshaun about.
That's right. So join us here. Find the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Like us, subscribe, please, so you can get them delivered as soon as we post them. We appreciate you wherever you're listening to it. Hey, maybe even tell somebody else about it so that there can be somebody else listening. Leave us a review, a rating, whatever you do. Anyway, we appreciate all of it. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.